Square Enix has been hyping up this port for over a year. The console version released, and they're like, hey, we're also bringing this to PC eventually, guys. And how well did they actually do on the port after a year, saying it's basically going to be one of the best PC games ever made? They did alright, I guess, but there are some problems, and it doesn't really pay a lot of attention to people's PCs of the day. Instead, they kind of built it for the future, which is a little bit concerning because I want to play it today. Michael here with a PC overview of Final Fantasy 15 Windows Edition. Now, one thing to mention is I did download this off of Steam. There are some issues with the Windows-specific version and the Origin-specific version, and so if you have those versions, there are some people that have had unique issues on those ones, mostly to do with DRM and full screen options, because, you know, the Windows version is a Windows Universal app, which has some problems when it comes down to borderless full screen on some machines, but those are pretty rare cases and they are very specific. I am running on the Steam version, so I'll be talking about that version specifically, and it is the most popular version, I think. So not too big of a deal. Now today, if you're interested in my opinions on the game, I will talk about that a little bit later along with some gameplay in the background, but first we're going to be talking about the port and everything that comes with it, and we're going to be talking about the options and performance and stuff like that. So if you're interested, let's go ahead and continue. Now, my PC specs are a GTX 1070, a 6700K i7 Intel CPU, and I have 32 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM. I also have this game installed on an NVMe SSD, which is incredibly intensive still. Like, this game is built for future PCs. Now, I'm mentioning my specs because this game is going to bring my PC down to its knees. We're going to have some stuttering in the footage when I actually get into gameplay because I just cannot capture this game properly without dropping absolutely everything, including resolution. And so one thing to mention about this game is if you have a low-end machine, do not expect to run this game. You are going to want at least a mid-range PC to end up getting the console-grade experience, which is basically turning down all the options. And so, yeah, be aware of that. If you have a low-end machine, like a laptop or something, don't expect to run this game. You need a dedicated GPU that actually has at least 4 gigabytes of RAM or VRAM, or else you're going to have problems with this game. And a lot of people are experiencing crashes on low-end and mid-range machines, and so be aware of that. There's also some optimization issues, but we'll talk about those a little bit later. One thing to mention about the PC version as well is that it comes with downloadable content on it for free. Well, free isn't, it's included in the cost of the game technically because they did a nice little price bump when they went to PC. But yeah, it comes with all the DLC that came out before the PC version ended up coming out with, which is a nice little touch. So if you had this on console and you never got the DLCs, guess what? They're here, so there's something new to experience. This includes the in-game cosmetics and the weapon DLCs and stuff, and so those will be automatically added to your inventory. Some people have complained because the DLC weapons are slightly stronger than the starter weapons, but they're not really overpowered or anything. You can actually get stronger weapons fairly early in the game, so it's not that big of a deal, but if you don't want to use them, just, you know, try to ignore them. You can't sell them or anything, so I wish there was a toggle option for that, but whatever. We're going to go ahead and go into the options now. Now, one thing I will praise this game for is the fact that it has a ton of customization options. So if you like certain effects over others, you can end up kind of tinkering with things, and I have definitely had to do that. Like I said, I'm running a GTX 1070, which is not strong enough to run this game at my current resolution, which is 1440. I could drop it, but whatever, we'll talk about that. Anyway, so display, we got our resolution option, which is basically, it's not technically my resolution as in rendering the game. This is going to be your monitor resolution. There is a render scaling option. We'll look at it a little bit later to actually determine that. Now, this supports up to ultra wide, and it supports up to 4K and 8K and stuff like that. So you can end up using Nvidia DSR or AMD's equivalent to actually make the game look, you know, pretty dang good when you end up getting to high resolution, but keep in mind, resolution is going to be one of your highest factors. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Your monitor, which monitor you want to use. Now, I'm not going to screw with any of these settings because it will screw up my capture that was already a pain to start. And then you get full screen. Now, you will notice that there's a lack of borderless full screen. How it ends up working is that when you have this off, it's just in window mode. However, when you turn it on, it's going to be in full screen mode. If you Alt-Tab out, it switches over to borderless window and stays in borderless window. Now, this is technically a problem with gamers like me that want the absolute maximum performance on games like this, because when you switch into borderless mode, it is going to slightly hit your performance just a little bit. And so for me, I get about a stable 60 FPS, maybe a little bit about 58 or something along those lines. And if I go into borderless window, I lose about 4 FPS, which makes it so it looks like it's stuttering and stuff like that. It's just inconvenient. So if you Alt-Tab out of the game, you basically lose your full screen, and you can't actually re-enable full screen unless you go into the options and toggle this off and on again, which is a little bit annoying. Not that big of a deal. I don't think borderless full screen is that big of a deal, and I haven't noticed any sort of stuttering caused by it or anything, except for the performance drop, which is a little bit annoying. Vsync, however, I have it off. You'll notice here, I hate tearing, and so I always have this sort of option on. However, for this game, if I have it on inside the game options, it causes massive micro stutter within the game itself for whatever reason. It refuses to go above 58 FPS, and it just constantly stutters here and there, and it is really, really annoying. And so to be able to actually fix that, I went into my Nvidia driver and forced Vsync on for this specific game, and then turned it off in game, and that completely fixed the stuttering, and so I no longer get that, which is actually super, super nice. FPS is actually going to be a little display you'll notice up at the top left. I will turn this on when we get into gameplay a little bit later, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it off for now because it's very distracting. That it was a useful tool because my Afterburner was not able to hook with this game very well. Now we get into graphics options. This is actually where most of the bulk is on the PC port itself. Then you get frame rate, so you have 30 FPS, 60 FPS, and 120 FPS. Default is 120 FPS, so if you want to actually cap your frame rate, you will want to go in here. I don't like running my GPU hotter than I need to, so I capped mine at 60 FPS because that's the frame rate that I run at on my PC, and I cannot run this game at 120 FPS anyways, so it's not like it matters. Here is where you actually get your rendering settings for your 3D. So basically 100% is going to render at whatever your resolution was set in the options, and you can end up turning it down. If you're at 1440, you can send it to 75, then that's going to be about 1080. And so this is what a lot of people have recommended that I do, because running this game anything higher than 1080 is incredibly intensive, and this is going to be one of your biggest saving options next to these additional effects that come from Nvidia, which are kind of experimental and not really for modern gaming. It's really for future gaming PCs and stuff like that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. You get presets to actually set all these up. If you want the console grade experience, just set it to low and then turn off motion blur, and that's pretty much what you'll get from a console. And you have to set the resolution down to 720p and upscale it to 1080 as well, or to whatever resolution you're doing, because the console version of this game did not run particularly well either. However, the good thing about this version is that you can tune up these options quite a bit. Now, there is some optimization issues that the game has, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but for the most part, this game actually has a ton of options. Now, you'll notice an assets option I can't turn on here. This is actually the free HD textures DLC, which is like the 4K textures and stuff like that. I have been recommended not to install those, and I recommend that to everyone else unless you actually want to use them, and you actually have 16 gigabytes of like VRAM or something along those lines, because they are 4K textures, they are going to hit your performance pretty dang hard. But you can toggle it on and off, but it also makes the size of the game larger. The game size is already 120 gigs. It ends up making it 160 gigs when you install that pack. So I'm just not going to screw with it. I know I can't run it with it on anyways. They supposedly look beautiful, but I think the game looks fine as is. There are some gnarly textures, but the actual DLC that gives you 4K textures doesn't actually fix any of those, and I'll talk about those a little bit later. Model LOD, this is the kind of range and the quality of the models it's going to use in the distance and close up in some cases. And so I left this on average. I was actually running with it on high for a while, but I noticed it actually had a huge effect on performance, especially when you end up getting into the car and driving around. And so I ended up turning it down to average, and that boosted up my FPS by quite a bit. So if you're having frame rate problems, you could end up trying to turn this down. Then you get TRAM, which is going to be your texture data that is loaded into your VRAM at any given moment in time. I have mine on highest because I am running an 8 gigs of VRAM on my GPU, and so basically I'm able to turn this on the highest, and I don't have that high resolution textures on. If you have high resolution textures on, the free DLC and everything, which is the 4K textures, you are going to want to turn this down. Otherwise, you are going to run into stuttering because it's going to try and use more VRAM than it has, and it's going to start using your RAM instead of your VRAM, which is going to be incredibly slow in comparison to normal, and you will kind of notice some micro stuttering. Now, when I had it on high and average, it was capping the amount of data it was putting in there, and so it was using my RAM anyways, and so turning this on actually improved my performance a ton. So if you have enough VRAM, make sure to have this on the highest setting you can handle. Otherwise, you will have stuttering here and there, especially when it loads into textures. I was having it so if I turned my camera around, it would stutter, and it was really, really annoying. Geo-Mapping is tessellation. Tessellation looks gorgeous, but in this game, it is absolutely one of the biggest performance hitters in this game. I do not know why or what they ended up doing to make it so that tessellation was this intensive, but if I turn this on, I go from 60 FPS down to 40, and I do not know why. It shouldn't be doing that, and I think it's an optimization bug, something along the lines of just screwing up, but if you're having performance problems, just turn this off, just outright. It's not that important. The game looks fine without it. Then you have lighting. I have mine on average, and you can end up turning it up all the way to highest. The game, the lighting between high and highest really wasn't all that noticeable, and so I don't really care, but running it on average kind of gives me a decent kind of thing, and average for shadows and ambient occlusion as well. Ambient occlusion is fairly lightweight. However, if you turn it on high, you will end up getting some effects here. Here's another port problem we actually have is anti-aliasing. You'll notice we have, 3 different options here. We have none. We have FXAA and TAAA. I would strongly recommend turning on TAAA, and then I used my graphics driver, aka I opened up the Nvidia control panel, and I forced on 2 times for MSAA to overwrite TAA. This game requires you to have any sort of anti-aliasing, preferably TAA, or else you are going to get dithered textures. If you don't know what that means, there is a visual bug when it comes down to hair in Final Fantasy games since Final Fantasy 13, to where the hair just doesn't look right. It looks like a dithered image, and it looks like there's a bunch of pixels just kind of floating in the air, and the hair absolutely looks terrible. The reason for this is the game expects you to have TAA or MSAA anti-aliasing. However, in the game, there are no options to customize this whatsoever. The default TAA, it looks nice, but it is incredibly intensive. And so I went into my Nvidia control panel and forced on, I overrode the settings or whatever. I can show a screenshot on screen right now to show what I did. And so basically I just made it so it was 2 times, and it doesn't look as good, but it runs and the hair looks fine. If you have this off or use FXAA looks absolutely terrible in this game. I have no idea what they're using, but it looks god awful. It is one of the worst examples of FXAA I've ever seen in a game, and it just makes the entire scene blurry, and it has jaggies everywhere. So I don't know what the hell this option does, but it is terrible. And then you can do none, which is going to have the dithered texture problem I was talking about. So just turn on TAA, use your Nvidia control panel or your AMD equivalent to just force on some anti-aliasing to make it so it's not as intensive. Then you get motion blur. I have it off because motion blur is ugly in every single game ever existing. Filtering, I'm not 100% sure what this is. I could not notice any difference between any of these settings, so I have it on low, and I don't know what it does, so there you go. And then you have the optional Nvidia effects, which is basically going to be using Nvidia GameWorks. Now, this does work on an AMD GPU. This is not specific to a Nvidia GPU, but you are able to turn these on. These are things like dynamic hair and fur, and then the high-quality ambient occlusion and stuff like that. Like, these effects, they look all right, but in most cases, they are going to massively hit performance on any sort of rig. These sort of effects are just advanced kind of, they're almost like CG effects that they threw into GameWorks, and they work, but if you are having problems with performance, turn these ones off first. I don't think they're required whatsoever. They're just to make things look pretty, but they are incredibly intensive, and it seems like nobody's really figured out a way to implement them to where they're not intensive. I think they're just intensive works to begin with, so there you go. I don't even know what Shadow Libs does. I haven't actually seen that in a game yet, and I haven't screwed around with it on my own APK. Now we get into brightness and stuff like that. You can obviously customize that sort of stuff, and we can get into the audio. Audio, multiple volume sliders, perfectly, acceptable. Speakers, it says television and home theater. There's no headphones option, which is a little bit weird. Most of these types of games have that option, but leave it on television, it sounds fine. I don't really necessarily know what it does either. Subtitles, I had to turn these on. They default to off, so I went ahead and did that. And you can also go into key bindings. Key bindings can be completely redone when it comes down to the keyboard and mouse, which is super, super nice. And you can double bind as well. You can also bind 2 keys to the same action, which is, again, super, super nice. However, that said, you cannot do that for the gamepad. If you go into controls, you get the gamepad and you have type A, B, and C and no customization options, which is super unfortunate. I like to be able to customize my controller options, but it's not exactly common. And so whatever, I guess. It's just unfortunate. The default bindings for the keyboard and the gameboard and mouse, wow, I screwed that up. The gamepad and the default bindings for the keyboard and the mouse seem to work perfectly fine, although people like to customize, and there you go. So you can't customize the gamepad besides these presets, which is sucky, but you can customize everything when it comes down to the gamepad. Mouse sensitivity here is going to be included inside of your sensitivity for your camera when it comes down to actually inside the game. You also get tracking speed, which is how far or how fast it actually tracks enemies and stuff like that. Most of this is going to be to get into the game, but you can invert your controls as well. And so there you go. One thing to mention about the mouse and stuff is I did mention mouse sensitivity or whatever when it comes down to the camera and stuff like that. You cannot actually change the mouse sensitivity. So if I go into the menu here, the menus have somewhat of a mouse control. However, it controls up and down. So when I go up and down, it actually scrolls through here, and it feels very unresponsive, and it's weird. I wouldn't consider this full mouse control inside the menus, but it is incredibly hard to use. So I recommend if you're using the keyboard and mouse, use WASD and then E to enter, right click, whatever to enter and exit. So there you go. It's just extremely weird. There is actually no mouse pointer in the game whatsoever, and so keep that in mind when you get into controls and stuff like that. Aside from that, we just get a bunch of different options. We get vibration for controllers as well, which is super, super nice. We don't always see that, and so I like to praise the game when it ends up doing these. Definitely not a feature that's expected. Also, when you get into language and stuff like that, you have multiple voices as well, including the original Japanese ones, which I found the boys sound like girls, and so I just don't like the Japanese one. So I'm using English, but you also have a bunch of text options as well. And so, again, super, super nice there. The audio options are quite nice as well, and so... yeah, and then everything else comes down to the actual, game settings and stuff. So, yeah. Anyways, let's go ahead and go into gameplay while we talk about performance and stuff like that. Because as a port, the game does have some optimization issues. It kind of has some little kind of issues with performance and things like that with some of the options, and they're just not particularly great in some cases, especially when it comes down to stuff like anti-aliasing. There was also an ANSO setting that doesn't actually tell you what it is. It just has a low, medium, and high, which I assume is, 4 times, 8 times, and 16 times. I would assume. Not 100% sure, and I'm not sure if they're using anything advanced. I am forcing that in my graphics driver anyways, so it doesn't really matter, and I don't notice any blurring. But when we get into game, the game actually looks pretty beautiful, even on average. I would say that it looks like a standard, 2017, 2018 game on average. However, you can boost this game up to look incredible when you actually get it up to all the options turning it up, and that is actually a good thing. Now, you are going to notice, if you're watching this video at 60 FPS, there is going to be some captured stutter here and there. And I apologize. There was literally nothing I can do about that. I tried turning this game all the way down, and I still wasn't able to actually do anything. Can I drive manually right now? I can't. Thanks, game. I wanted to drive manually. That would have been nice to do for once, but nope, it's going to make me do force stuff. So I am technically still at the very early of the game, or early bit of the game. Wait, can I just teleport there? Oh, it'll teleport to that other one. Okay, cool. We're going to go there. I'm trying to get to combat as soon as possible, and so I want to fast travel, and I didn't set this up beforehand because I'm an idiot. I thought it was closer, but apparently not. So some things I mention about the PC Sport specifically. One, the game looks good. And if you want the console quality options, you can just end up turning up everything down to low and then set it up so that you are running it at an upscaled resolution from 720p, because that's what the console ran out, and it already had some performance problems on the console as well. And this game, the engine itself has some optimization issues, I would say. There are some options to where it seems to be using too much no matter what. If I turn this game all the way down to low, it's still using 100% of my GPU, and I still get stuttering every once in a while once effects go off. The game just is not supportive of higher resolutions, and this actually carries over to a lot of the textures as well. Text ends up being a little bit blurry at 1440. There's a lot of little tiny things, like let's say the mission complete icons, for example, just look absolutely abysmal. It looks like they came from an NES. Wow, character models and stuff like that look like they're from 2006 CG, and they absolutely look incredible, especially when you get down to some of the textures and you start using the HD texture pack. The game actually looks quite gorgeous in a lot of ways. The render distance is beautiful, and I don't notice any sort of pop in. It has a nice little fade in effect for the grass and stuff, and it is very enjoyable to look at. That said, it's also incredibly intensive. Therefore, if you're running on a low-end or mid-range machine, it just does not offer the options that are enabled on most PC games these days that will allow you to actually run the game properly. And so it's not necessarily going to be something that is very effective on a lower-end machine. So if you don't have a high-end machine, you're going to be forced to deal with lower resolutions, which is just a little bit unfortunate. That said, though, everything, like I said, looks gorgeous, and it runs well when you have the options turned down. A lot of people have been complaining like, oh, I'm on a GTX 1070 and I can't max this game out. You're not supposed to. The one thing to mention about this PC port is, although it has some textures that are pretty low quality and they're not particularly amazing here and there, and it was definitely meant for a 1080 resolution kind of experience, this game has a lot of effects and a lot of stuff that can go up to a higher resolution that is just meant for future PCs. Whoops, I went into stasis. That was an accident. And so what they're doing with this game is they're trying to show off what they can do with their engine. They're trying to show like, hey, these are the options that we have available to us that we can actually use in our tool set. And these are the sort of graphics options that you'll see in the future. And if you have a strong machine, they're making it say, hey, you can end up running this game as beautiful as you want to, and you have the customization to end up doing everything. And so that's what they're kind of aiming for. So if you are running on, PC, you're going to have to turn these options down. There are currently no current, let's say, what do they say? Consumer grade, I guess you would say. And even though this is higher than consumer grade, my 1070 system is going to be the highest end of consumer grade you would be able to find. But even dual 1080 systems are not able to run this game at, 4K resolution with all the options turned up. You're going to have to turn things down. You're going to have to change the options that you have available. And so, yeah, like I said, you're going to need to end up looking at that. Now, some other problems I've noticed with the port. One, I don't necessarily like the mouse and keyboard control. I prefer the gamepad. I just do not like the way the mouse controls. It doesn't have any sort of mouse acceleration or anything that I noticed, but when it comes down to gameplay, it just feels so much more fluid when I'm using a gamepad. I don't know if that's because there's some weird issue with the keyboard and mouse itself. It seems like, you know, movements and stuff like that are a little bit juddery when I end up using the keyboard and mouse. Like, I'll just go ahead and swap over because I believe you can use them at both at the same time. But yeah, it's just the camera is super sensitive, and the camera option doesn't have a separate one for the gamepad or whatever, and so it's just a little bit annoying. But it feels weird. Like the smoothing between walking and stuff like that is a little bit too janky for me, and I just don't really like it. While when I'm using the gamepad, it feels like it goes in smooth. Another thing about the textures I did mention and stuff like that, you'll notice like when I was in combat and stuff, I don't know if it'll show up on the video because the video will be downsampled. But some of the textures just don't look great, and this actually carries over to some of the visual effects as well. I don't know if that's because I just don't have the HD texture pack that is going to hit my performance if I turn on, but it seems like a lot of the UI was just meant for 1920 by 1080. This also means that some of the visual effects and the on-screen UI is also gigantic as well. Oh hey, lower level enemies. I'm just going to completely one-shot these freakers. Boom, and dead. Woo! One thing about over-leveling, I'm just going to go ahead and stasis, and because I can kill these guys very quickly. Yay! So I just did a fight that was actually a higher level, and the reason I did that is because I'm using the DLC weapons, which make level 1 to 5 enemies absolutely abysmally hilarious, but yeah, but anyways, so you saw like in combat and stuff like that. One thing that I will say though is that I haven't really experienced any FPS drops inside of combat. However, I have not gotten to the summons yet, which is supposedly what I'm going to end up getting to a little bit later. But some people have actually reported that there are performance problems when you get into using summons and stuff like that. Once again, I just noticed my capture and stuff like that is like stuttering like mad. Well, again, I apologize. Just watch the video at 30 FPS. I just can't do anything. Cup noodles. I hate the advertising. But yeah, like stuff like some of the bow boards and stuff like that, I can go look at the bow boards. Like the texture is like, there's no texture setting inside the game. So whatever textures you like, you're either using the default textures that were like on console and stuff like that that have been slightly improved for the PC version. But you'll notice like there's some ugly textures in this game. And without that HD texture pack that ends up, you know, hitting all the performance, you know, it's either they're on or off. And so, yeah, there's some ugly textures in this game, and it doesn't necessarily transition over, especially when the game has so many large visual effects that are just so intensive. Aside from that, though, I haven't really noticed any problems with the port itself. It just seems like they need to work on some optimization, and they need to make some lower-end settings to make it so it'll run on lower-end machines, because if you have a low-end machine, it's going to end up hitting your performance a lot. And I mean, people are having just outright crashes on mid-range machines as well, and so... yeah, just be careful with this one. You are going to want a high-end PC to run this game, and if you want console quality options, they are available, and you'll probably be able to run them on a high-end machine. Just do not be expecting to turn this game up all the way like most people do when they have a high-end machine. Like, because most developers, when they go into a PC version, a lot of people have said like, oh, this is a terrible PC port because I can't max out the options. Most developers end up, I'm sure, we'll just fucking refuel. Most PC ports and stuff like that, they focus on current gen hardware. So like, all right, 1080, that'll be our highest option ever. And one thing that actually annoys me about that is that when you end up getting into the future and you end up having higher end stuff in the future, you just don't have the options to kind of push it to the limit besides resolution and stuff like that. And so, yeah, it would be nice to actually have those options. And this game offers that. And so it offers a lot of future proofing. And whether they're going to support this game in the long term or whether any of these effects are actually going to matter in the future, it, you know, is debatable. But the port itself isn't too bad. I wouldn't say it's as good as they've been hyping it up to be. I think that there are a lot of things that could end up improving. And I was like, it was just very unfortunate to see that there was things like, let's say, for example, the, you know, anti-aliasing being kind of kooky. Like, I was like, all right, why is that a problem? Like, that shouldn't be a problem in this game because they're, you know, hyping it up and like, oh, we're going to have so many options and unique features and things like that for the PC version. And it's like, oh, on there, they're just like, oh, yeah, but, you know, we're going to give you one freaking anti-aliasing option that works and everything else is going to be botched unless you force it in your graphics driver. Like, we shouldn't have to do that. That should not be a thing that we have to do. Also, I did mention that I would turn on my frame rate counter, and I didn't. But what do I think of the game so far? I like it. It's all right. I mean, it's not my favorite Final Fantasy. I would say I am getting some frame rate drops here as well inside of the game, so my footage is... oh god, I'm capturing at 40 FPS right now. I apologize for that. I am so sorry. This game is intensive and I can't really run it well, and I'm too stubborn to turn it down below 1440 because I like having a high resolution. I would rather have this game look like it's from 2006 than have, you know, 50 frame rates or lower resolution. So there you go. But yeah, as far as my thoughts on the game. I'm only a few hours in, which is basically till tutorial zone when it comes down to Final Fantasy. Final Fantasies are always a slow start. There's very few exceptions to that. And so, yeah, I mean, it's starting slow. And the gameplay, I think there's way too much automation in it. And so it's not nearly as fun as I would like it to be. Like, when it comes down to, like, using blindsides and combos and things like that, which you would have in other Final Fantasies, you just don't really have all that much control over it. Instead, it focuses on positioning and timing, which, again, that's fine. It's just not as fun as I would like it to be. I really liked Final Fantasy 13-3 or Final Fantasy Lightning Returns combat system, and it gave a lot of control, and I was hoping that they would kind of go in that direction with this, and they kind of didn't. And when it comes to the story, I couldn't give a sheep's butthole about the story so far. It shows, it starts off the game. I decided to do a tutorial, which was introducing me to characters I had never seen before. And it's like, hey, remember me? Yeah, I'm from the story, and I'm from this chapter. You remember me because you named me, right? Remember, guy? And I'm like, nope, I don't know who the fuck you are, and I don't really care. And it comes down to other characters as well, to where it's just like, I don't know or care about any of these characters. And I started up the game and it's showing off this cutscene. It's like, oh my god, we'll be there to the end, guys. And it's like, all right, I get what they're trying to do. They're trying to be like, yeah, these guys are great to each other, and they're trying to, do stuff till the end of time together. And that's kind of like what they're doing. Like, this guy is a prince and he is like protected by his best friends, that sort of thing. And so, like, yeah, I get what they're trying to do. It is incredibly poorly executed because I could not care. I don't know anything about these characters. I know Pronto has a camera. That is about it. I know Ignis knows how to cook and he drives. I know Gladios has a survival ability, which allows him to set up a tent, I guess. That's pretty much all I know. And I know Noctis is kind of a brat character because he's supposed to be the prince. I'm sure there's character development that'll happen later, but at the current point in the game, I couldn't care less about these characters. And the gameplay is not exactly drawing me in. So let's just say I'm not entirely impressed about this game. Let's just put it that way. So, thoughts on the game? I mean, as far as Final Fantasy, I can't really give any sort of definitive answers on what I think of the game so far, just because I haven't played enough of it. When it comes down to Final Fantasy, these are slow start games. They have a ton of content in them and a ton of mechanics, and I just haven't seen them yet. And I am screwing up this fight so much. Like, the fighting focuses on holding down the right button at the right time, and I'm just not paying enough attention. But you can literally just hold X and dodge literally everything. And so that's kind of annoying as well. Like, there's just so much automation. Like, when it comes down to, like, combo attacks, which I've done, like, 4 times, I'm not pushing any button to do that. I'm just holding down B to attack and do stuff. And so there you go. Like, the blocking and stuff like that, like, in these stronger fights, this is when the game is the most fun, is when I'm fighting things that are a higher level than me, because there is actually risk to it. But most of the fights are just, who has the higher stats, you win, GG, that's the end. And that's kind of how it goes, which, I mean, that's fine. It's just, they focused on trying to make it as pretty as possible, and I don't think that necessarily worked. Like, that was a major criticism in Final Fantasy 13. It's kind of unfortunate that they took that same route. They're like, oh, you guys only liked controlling one character in Final Fantasy 13, right, guys? And no, we didn't, actually. Oh, you liked it so that you could auto-battle for 90% of the game? No, we didn't, actually. We didn't like that. Oh, you guys like the repeat action button? Sure, yeah, that's fine. Okay, we'll just make it so that there's only one button now. What? And so, yeah, it's just, they took away a lot of the control in the gameplay, and so I'm not happy about that, because I really liked Final Fantasy 13's combat system, and I felt like it was the best Final Fantasy combat system they had when it came down to the pseudo turn-based stuff. This just isn't as fun. Like, they have special abilities and stuff like that, like I could end up using this, and just the cues and stuff like that don't necessarily pop up exactly when I'd want them. Some of the combat is just like floaty and stuff, and yeah, it's just not pleasing to play. But again, I am, not alone on that. A lot of people have said that the story is kind of lackluster and the combat system's not exactly to their preference. But, when it comes down to the combat system, that is going to be personal preference. But yeah, I've gone on for too long, so I'm going to go ahead and end this here. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this one. You can end up also leaving your thoughts in the comments below. If you end up having this PC port and you have other issues, or maybe there's an issue you're having that I haven't noticed here, make sure to leave those in the comments so that we can end up, letting people know, make sure they're informed. And obviously, if you want to play the multiplayer of this game, you can end up joining our Broken Chatbox Discord. It's called the Broken Chatbox. Link in the description. You can end up joining it up, and we'll have people that have this game, and so you can end up finding people for multiplayer matches, or you could just end up hanging out for our nightly gaming sessions. Last night we were playing Senran Kagura Peach Bija Flasha, which was really, really fun, except for the fact that the multiplayer was completely botched because they broke it in the day 1 patch, which was kind of unfortunate, but that's how it goes. But yeah, we play multiplayer games all the time. You can end up chatting around. You can talk about technical stuff or video creator stuff. If you're another video creator, it's another great community and stuff. So yeah, there you go. So not a lot of people are active in voice besides me and a bunch of friends, but jump in, become one of our friends. That is a thing that we can do. You can also end up checking out my website, which is new and revised as of lately. And so you can end up checking out all my new site design and my blog where I post about what I'm doing and what I'm kind of looking at doing in the future and stuff. So if you're interested in that, I have it available. So there you go. You can also end up supporting me on Patreon, which my website should link to. I haven't gotten the links up yet, so it will eventually. I'm sure it will. But yeah, so anyways, like I said, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Again, another combo attack that just completely missed. So random and weird. Yeah, I mean, I knew I wasn't going to like this one very much, unfortunately. Like, a lot of people were like, the story's not as good as the other Final Fantasies. And they're like, yeah, the combo system is pretty much automatic. And I'm like, all right, that doesn't sound too great, but I'm going to pick it up because it's Final Fantasy and I'm a freaking nerd. So, there you go. And it's a little bit disappointing. PC port's all right, though. So, that's a good thing. It is dangerous to travel at night. Consider returning to a rest point and waiting until morning. Use the map button. Return to rest point. Okay. Thank you, game. I will return to rest point now. Yes. Would you like... No, screw it. I am running Dangerous Life. YOLO!